so-called public speaking, etc. And he was very persuasive. Apparently, lots of people, really were very, very persuaded by him, etc. He was very charismatic, very dynamic. At one point, Herod Antipas began to change the way the Sea of Galilee's fishes were captured, because he wanted to make more money off of it. So instead of letting the local fishermen have the fishes and the money for the sale of the fish, he wanted to basically encroach on that. And so there was protests around the Sea of Galilee. Jesus was one of the ones that went there to help protest in favor of the fishermen and so on. He apparently did pretty well. Lots of people encouraged him to go on and preach in Jerusalem. He was a non-violent protester, and so when he went into Jerusalem, everyone agrees he rode in on a donkey, which was like, see, I'm not violent. No man would ride in on a donkey. That's silly. But in any case, he began his protests in Jerusalem, although every night he would stay at Bethany so that he wouldn't be killed by those that were trying to find him. They won't kill him during the day because of the crowds, etc. They didn't want to riot. But in any case, the priesthood figured out where he had to be going if he was going to Bethany every night, so they laid a trap for him, caught him, obviously at the Garden of Gethsemane, or the olive trees. In any case, they caught him and took him first to the priests, who sent him on to Herod, and then Herod sent him on to the Romans. The Romans killed him, crucified him, which was the common punishment for anyone who was a protester. Since it was a non-violent protest, if it was a violent protest, they would have killed everybody that was involved. Since he was leader of a non-violent protest, they just typically would kill the leaders. There were actually lots of people that were punished that way, and so he was crucified. And so, what happens after that, from the historical perspective is, he clearly influenced a lot of his followers to continue on teaching what he was teaching. And of course, the main one was Peter, on the one hand. Paul, also known as Saul initially, who was from Tarsus, was initially, and he was older, but he was there as a Pharisee in the city, and he was considered the Jesus group to be heretical, and so wanted them all to die, basically. So he was helping those that were persecuting the Christians. And at one point he was heading to Damascus, and the argument is that he was originally from Tarsus, so he was heading home probably for a visit, but others would say that he wanted to go and persecute, because the Christian groups had already spread, and so he was going to go and help persecute them there. But on the road, he ended up being converted himself. And here's I said last class that he never actually met Jesus. Well, if he did meet Jesus, most likely it wasn't during Jesus' actual lifetime, but it would have been on the road. He believed he met Jesus, and so he was convinced that he had met Jesus in the flesh. It says that in various places. Now, of course, the problem is that his interpretation of what Jesus was preaching was very different than everyone else. So that's why you get the folks that argue that you get a book by Chaim Maccabee, Paul invention of Christianity. And his letters were also the earliest documents in the corpus associated with the Jesus scriptures, New Testament. And you know, you can look at the history of that as well. Just tons of information out there, actually, on all of this. But so, let's go to St. Augustine and talk about because by the time we get to Augustine, they've already had the Council of Nicaea, right, which is where they've, you know, basically Constantine the Great calls all the Christian groups together and says, okay, you know, no more infighting, and some of them were even violent with one another, right? But you know, everybody, you know, has to come in and agree on what it means to be a Christian. And remember, we've got the various creeds that essentially were the conclusion. You know, okay, you know, a Christian has to believe these things. And if you look up creeds, by the way, every religious sect. Creed means in Latin, credo is I believe, right? So creed just means basically so that's just one church. It has several different. So there's many. Just trying to give you an idea how many there are. So look there. I think that's a partial list. Here's some more. You know, that basically you get the idea. There's lots and lots of versions of what we believe, and kind of the importance of that was if you traveled somewhere, because the Roman Empire and it established what, of course, was referred to as a Pax Romana, so the Roman peace, right? So you could more safely travel. Not that safe, you know. So it's not that safe, but it's they had roads. The safest way was by sea. You could at least avoid pirates. Although the danger there, of course, was the ships were not really that safe, you know. In fact, when we talk about the life of Paul, one of the things is that he was in multiple shipwrecks, as well as other, difficult times. But in any case, the creed is kind of your ticket. So if you go from one place to another and you're visiting, you can, having memorized the creed of your particular religious belief, you can then meet others and convince them that that's who you are by giving them the creed, right? So they can recognize you and then trust you because you're one of us, right? That still works in a lot of organizations yet.
So this is about trying to find your so-called brothers through this creed, like throughout the world.
Right.
Guarantee of safe travel there.
At least within that group, yeah. They could put you up for the night, they would trust you. And that still works. I've joined the Masons. If you're familiar with them. The reason I joined the Masons was when I got married, my wife's father, grandfather, and eventually her brother were all Masons. And, being, wanting to be liked by the family, I'm interested. But they were members of the Hermann Lodge in Philadelphia, which is a German-speaking lodge, and they didn't think my German was good enough for me to join the lodge, so I didn't. And when I was stationed in Berlin, in the army, it turned out the whole second floor where I worked were all Masons. All the upper echelon members, they were all members of the local American, Canadian Lodge, right, which was an English-speaking lodge in Germany. And so I got the letter, so I was introduced officially, and I became a Mason there. And it was just hilarious to me that I couldn't join the lodge locally in Philadelphia because it was German, and I ended up in Germany. So that was, but it's basically a brotherhood, a fraternity. They mostly get around. Actually, it's a drinking club for the most part, because after they have their services, which are not really very strange at all, actually, they sit around and they have beer or something, which is kind of typical. And they also donate money to charitable organizations and so on, like the Shriners, which is such an organization. The Wills Eye Institute, there's different things that they donate money to. But the thing is, you show up and say, I'm a member. In fact, today, of course, you have a card which says you're a member. But they do a test and they ask you the special handshakes and stuff. And if you know them, you're definitely one of us. And instantly you feel that kind of brotherhood. So it's kind of interesting that still works and was one of the reasons you have those creeds is so that you can prove to others that you are a follower of the same beliefs that they are. Because the official words, credo in unum Deum et in terra pax hominibus, so you can. So Augustine is post-Nicene. He's on that list of all the different writers that you could read about. He's one of the ones that comes after the council. So his full name, Aurelius, but he's from Hippo. That's Hipponesis, Hipponesis, or however you say that. And his family is kind of middle class, farmer, not quite farmer, but his father works hard for a living, and mostly ends up then spending money to make sure his son gets a good education. He basically gets the best education available in North Africa, in Hippo at the time. And so he becomes a rhetor, a teacher of speaking, right? And eventually, in fact, ends up going to Italy, where he actually ends up getting promoted enough that he becomes the emperor's rhetor. So he's like the official spokesperson for the emperor, which at the time was in Milan, even though the official capital was Rome. Rome was such a mess yes.
So the Hipponesis last name, did he get the last name from your birthplace?
Yeah, that just means really that he's from Hippo. Yeah. Names are a big issue, really, if you think about it. Moses means out of. When I think about Heraclitus, it's the glory of Hera. All these names seem to be meaningful in the sense that they tell you what the person was famous for. We grow up with a name that basically means nothing, right? Except maybe that your parents loved Princess Leia or something. Whatever. Who knows where the names come from? But we have, a particular pattern in our English-speaking culture. If you're from that culture, or if you're Spanish, right? I mean, we have different naming things. So the names are kind of interesting, where they come from, why they might change, etc. Just to be clear, Jesus was Jesus' name, Yeshua, according to the folks that at least did the movie. One movie, I forget the name of it now, but there was a movie that was The Passion of Christ. But in any case, Christ means in Greek Messiah. And it just means really the anointed one. And when I was a kid, my dad always used a middle initial. Whenever he got mad at us, It's not like Kunk on Christianity that points out, that Jesus Christ just happened to have a name that is the same two words that you use whenever you hit your thumb with a hammer. And he was a carpenter. But actually, they wouldn't have used the word Christ until quite late, really, like, maybe 120 or later, AD. John Dominic Crowson, when he talks about it, he refers to individuals as being Christic as opposed to being Christians, because Christianity hadn't been actually invented yet as a concept. But so Augustine becomes a rhetor, is a rhetor for the emperor in Milan, and he meets St. Ambrose. And I guess I can just hit that here, but let's do it this way. What? So St. Ambrose. Notice he was the Bishop of Milan at the time. Also very charismatic, had lots of followers, and became actually embroiled in a conflict with the emperor, because the emperor was a follower of Arius. Remember, the Nicene Council declared that the followers of Arius were heretics and they were banned. Remember, that's why the Nag Hammadi texts were found in the desert, because they weren't allowed to have them anymore. So they hid them, figuring they'll go back and get them when things, change. And it didn't. But in any case, Arius was Gnostic, and that was considered a heresy. Athanasius was the one he was the theologian that basically everyone agreed that's the correct interpretation. And that was basically the interpretation that Jesus was completely man and completely God, and that it's a mystery how that could be, right? The emperor at the time, though, was a follower of Arius, so you can see that heresy was still prevalent, among many. In fact, it's considered to have continued on kind of with the one of the earlier religions that Augustine was interested in was the Manichaeans or Manichaeans. They were followers of Mani. Mani was a Jesus follower, but at the same time believed that there was a dichotomy of power in the universe between the good and the evil. Believed that Lucifer was Jesus' brother, for example, and that the two of them were good and evil, and it was a war, and so the life of a normal individual is in a conflict between both the good and the evil, fighting for you, and the advantage to that was you could be on either side, and it's not any worse than the other. And for Augustine at the time, when he was a follower of Mani, it was nice because that meant you could have sex and be fine with that, because it's pleasurable. And in fact, Augustine had she wasn't officially a wife, but he had a partner, whatever we want to call her, and had a son by her, and he was with her, I think, for like some 20 years, until he was convinced by Ambrose first to become a Christian, and then eventually he would head back home to Hippo, where he was chosen to become a monk, and then eventually, because of his education, he became the bishop of Hippo. And at that point, he began writing letters and engaging the theologians all over the Mediterranean via letters. And they're not